Cities with the most skyscrapers? Look at how many of them are in China. Longest subway systems in the world? China absolutely dominates. Most populous cities? China again. Most extensive high-speed rail network in the world? You guessed it, the answer is China.
China, 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 China.
In recent decades, the rise of China has happened in every way possible. You're talking about military power, technological advancements, economic size, cultural influences, like for example drama, internet memes, and even influencers like iShowSpeed, and of course, urban infrastructure and public transit. This makes so many people in the Western world jealous. Why can't we get that? When China builds a countrywide high-speed rail system in 10 years, it can't even lay 1 mile of track in California. Especially if you're an urbanist in the US who is more of a liberal and critical of the Republican Party's stances on transit versus cars. So you look to China. And don't get me wrong, you're absolutely right to feel that way. However, is China really how you think it is? How much do you know about China's urban planning policies and its unique challenges that it faces? Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. It's the Conservative Geographer here. Are you an urbanist or more of a suburban car lover? And are you jealous about China's great achievements in city infrastructure and transit? Or do you have mixed feelings? Whatever your thoughts are. However, my views about China's urbanism is very nuanced. So in this video, I'll do a side-by-side comparative analysis between the US and China in terms of the following categories: urban planning institution, urban style, public transit, road design and safety, and finally, environmental quality. As someone who has lived in both countries for significant periods, this is a topic that I am very enthusiastic about. I've always wanted to talk about it, so please watch this video till the very end. So it would simply make the most sense to begin this ultimate US-China comparison from the core, political institutions, and what urban planning is all about in both countries. In China, there is no private ownership of land, everybody knows that, and you don't pay property taxes. The government owns all of it, and you just have the right to use it, whether you're a farmer, a home buyer, or a business owner. Of course, this is a very defining feature of a socialist institution, and this can have some benefits, such as the government will make planning decisions on a very comprehensive level, and they have the power to act it out. China's subway and rail systems, as well as these numerous slum clearance and new satellite city projects, for example, are all direct results of this. America, however, on the other hand, is the absolute opposite, where the right to private property is quote-unquote God-given. You have different municipalities everywhere, and they're essentially competing with each other, essentially creating an economic imbalance between the inner cities, the countryside, and affluent suburbs. But that said, there is no perfect institution in the world, and one may think that the American way gives local people the most authority to decide what happens. Plus, you may not know this, but the Chinese government has long created a dual system of urban versus rural residency, which is dependent on where you're born, and you cannot easily change that. Large populations of migrant workers gather in cities, hoping to become economically better off by hard working, but their rural residency hinders just that. So why does the government do that? It is a legacy of the communist experiment, and the ultimate goal was to eliminate the urban bourgeois class. Sounds pretty messed up, right? And in the past decades, local city governments in China essentially all did this practice of selling rural land to real estate developers for greater municipal revenue. This is largely responsible for the dramatic rise and fall of the Chinese real estate market. Now you have literal ghost towns around the country. But not just that. Numerous farmers across the country were displaced. Sprawling suburbs look monolithic and ugly. But in contrast, at least developments in America aren't overbuilt for profit to that level in China, and rather are a real reflection of the actual housing demand. So given how the US respects property rights and has a somewhat healthier real estate market, I'm going to say the US beats China in planning institutions. Now, let's talk about how housing developments typically look like in China and the US. The American suburbs. Everybody knows that. It originated from the idea of country living and then the American dream post war, where everyone gets their own natural space and privacy for a nuclear family to live in. Of course, this type of housing style is heavily debated nowadays for being repetitive, unsustainable, and lacking social interactions. Now let's look at China. What may be really surprising to you is that although Chinese cities are definitely a lot denser than the US, developments in the past decades often lack mixed use functions or options to get around places, just like in America, which leads to severe congestion. Developers in China are largely influenced by the Soviet style neighborhoods, which originally came from Le Corbusier's tower in a park idea. And seems y'all urbanists don't like Le Corbusier at all, but he would be happy to see what China does. So you see, the two countries are almost going down a similar trajectory in urban planning. Both China and the US have historic neighborhoods that are dense and walkable before things started to change. Fascinating, right? So before you criticize American suburbs as ugly and sprawling, in which you're absolutely right about that, but you should take a look at around the world and see if others are facing their own unique challenges. And don't forget the fact that many cities around the US are ramping up on new urbanism and transit-oriented developments as well. Okay, public transit. While China is clearly the winner here, everyone knows that Chinese cities have arguably some of the best metro and BRT systems in the world. Plus, a nationwide high-speed rail system was constructed in merely less than 2 decades. And they're also known for being reliable, clean, safe, and with a high ridership. On the other hand, in the US, cities and regions have a legacy of good rail transit, but their heyday is long gone. As of now, a few cities on the east and west coasts, as well as in the Midwest, tend to have somewhat extensive yet aging infrastructure of subway and commuter rail services, only exceptions being BART and the DC Metro where they're newer. And many booming cities in the West and the Sunbelt have growing light rail systems, to name a few: Portland, Salt Lake City, Denver, and Dallas. However, the construction of any major transit project can become politically contentious, as issues like funding and eminent domain are often heatedly debated among politicians, unions, and property owners. And because of the Americans' car dependency, ridership of US public transit is low. This isn't really a problem in socialist China. That said, in China, the issue is the complete opposite. Many subway and high-speed rail projects are overbuilt for the sake of the government wanting to show off. And that is also wrong, okay? First of all, you should use your money wisely to improve all walks of life, not just merely on transportation. Secondly, such redundant projects are depleting local government budgets, leading to many stations being abandoned or never even completed in the first place. Do you really need a modern train line that leads to the middle of nowhere?
Speed railway station in Danzhou, Hainan, which costs over 40 million yuan and covers an area of nearly 2,000 square meters, has not been put into use in the 8 years since its construction. The Hainan Provincial Development and Reform Commission explained that after communication with the railway department, it was found that the station's daily passenger flow was less than 100, resulting in significant operational losses, which is the main reason restricting its usage. The small city of Danzhou, with a population of less than 1 million, built 3 high-speed railway stations simultaneously, leaving many baffled. In Nanjing, the capital of Jiangsu province, Jiangpu Station and Zijinshan East Station have remained unused for over a decade since their construction, falling short of expected passenger numbers.
Last but not least, the US has arguably the best air travel in the world. Yes, I'm counting air travel as public transit in this case. Airports are everywhere, with frequent flights throughout the country. In China, while the airline industry is also rapidly growing, the most prominent constraint would be the fact that the military controls most of the airspace. So you may have significant delays from time to time, and they just won't tell you why. But overall, again, China wins in transit, just with some important nuance. Okay, I'm not an expert in traffic engineering, and maybe some of you aren't necessarily interested in this very technical topic either. However, I must say that China and the US have some very different philosophies in roadway design, engineering, and driving behaviors. In the US, we know that there is a very mature traffic engineering academic field that originates all the way till early 20th century, with proven theories and practices throughout the decades. This helps with having the most efficient roadway design in most places. For example, you have some really innovative design, such as using street parking to shield bike lanes, as well as relatively educated drivers. The only downside that I can think of would be the lack of sidewalks and a relatively high number of pedestrian deaths. And this is unfortunate, and this is why traffic engineers in America need to start working with city planners more to push for some change in travel behavior and modes. On the contrary, again, China is relatively new in this realm, and many roadway designs and speed limits are frankly speaking inappropriate. And again, the governments in China love to show off. And in the context of roadway design, they'll construct absolutely beautiful boulevards everywhere, with manicured gardens along the way, as well as excessive lighting at night. The other thing is that most Chinese residents didn't start owning cars and driving until the very early 2000s. And nowadays, streets in Chinese cities have all kinds of transportation modes mixed together. You're talking about cars, bikes, electric mopeds, and in the more rural areas, even tricycles and tuk-tuks. So that leads to a problem that traffic engineers just cannot easily solve, which is that traffic is always going to be a mess, okay? And people don't always follow the rules because of a lack of education. Notably, this boom in electric mopeds has caused some significant problems, to say the least. A very common type of headline in China that you'll see is that some delivery courier riding an electric moped runs a red light in the hope of earning money faster, gets hit and killed by a car. Which is sad, because moped riders, they get their own separate lanes already, but there is an enormous number of them, like you cannot even imagine. And they often think that these riders can accelerate fast enough to take risks. Another problem is that in China, cops will never pull you over. They'll use the camera surveillance system to detect speeding or other types of violations. You know how China is world famous for mass surveillance, and it limits people's freedom while creating notably safe streets, but I digress. It's a double-sided sword. But using cameras to monitor traffic violations can sometimes be effective, but a problem also comes with it, which is that drivers will just slow down whenever they pass under a camera, and then continue to speed afterwards. So in this case, I think it's fair to conclude that the US wins in roadway design. Since this is already a very long video, and y'all may be tired already, I'm just going to briefly mention environmental protection. You would be tempted to think that the US is known for an exemplary in successfully solving the air and water pollution issues via legislation and decades of efforts, while Chinese cities have always struggled with heavy smog amid this wave of industrialization. You're not wrong. That's exactly how I felt when I first moved to the US. But let's take a little closer look at China. The pollution level has dropped by a lot in past few years, thanks to the government's efforts to ramp up oversight on factories, as well as to promote EVs. Domestically designed and manufactured electric vehicles have become such a large market in China nowadays. You can question where these companies got the technology so fast that they could so quickly catch up to Tesla. And I know what you're talking about. That's just not the focus of this video. So, given how much China is able to make progress on environmental quality improvements, I'm going to give the two countries a tie here. Okay, I'm glad you've made it to the very end of this video. It is indeed a very complex topic, and I hope that I did a great job breaking this down. What do you think? Do you think China is doing a wonderful job in urbanism and beating many Western countries? Or is China doing a lot of things unwisely that will lead to major societal issues in the future unless it starts to make some change? Whatever your thoughts are, please let me know and like and subscribe to this channel.